An independent evaluation of Marcy Correctional Facility in Utica found 80% of inmates had witnessed or personally experienced verbal, physical, or sexual abuse by corrections officers or other staff. And the state prison agency hasn't disputed that finding and says it's working to address those issues or has already. When you talk to inmates themselves or to prisoner advocates around the state, they say violence by CEOs is commonplace at nearly all state prisons, and not enough is being done to stop it. That's today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street Plaza, Glens Falls. And the New York State Caregiving and Respite Coalition, seeking volunteers aged 55 plus to support family caregivers in northern and central New York. Visit nyscrc/AmeriCorps.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, January 27th. First up, some state lawmakers want a pay raise for restaurant workers and tips on top of that. Workers in the food service industry and legislators who support them took to the State House today to make their case. Jung-Yoon Han reports for the New York Public News Network.
Progressive lawmakers are pushing for a bill that would require employers to pay tipped workers a higher minimum wage on top of tips. Under current law, employers can pay food service workers less than the state's minimum wage, assuming their tips make up the difference. Assemblymember Jessica Gonzalez Rojas is a co-sponsor of the bill.
Tips should be what they are, gratuitous, a thank you for your service, but they shouldn't depend on those tips just to make minimum wage.
Minimum wages would increase incrementally over the next few years and be adjusted for inflation. Lawmakers are renewing the effort to increase minimum wage for food service workers after it failed to pass in the legislature in previous years. In Albany, I'm Jung-Yoon Han for the New York Public News Network.
For the second time in a week, prison staff in Malone were hospitalized after encountering an unknown substance. According to Channel 7 News, an inmate at Upstate Correctional was found unresponsive in the prison's infirmary Saturday night. The corrections officers and nurses who responded then started feeling sick. Some were lightheaded, while others lost consciousness. All were hospitalized. Earlier in the week, 20 staff members from Upstate were hospitalized with similar symptoms. Officials haven't confirmed what kind of substance may have caused the symptoms, though Narcan was used in both incidents. The nasal spray is used to reverse opioid overdoses. Lawmakers in Albany are pushing to reform New York's prison system. That's after guards at a state correctional facility near Utica fatally beat an inmate last month. Experts say that inmates face all kinds of assaults and intimidation by officers. Emily Russell reports on the culture of violence behind bars.
It happened in less than 10 minutes. Body camera footage shows 43-year-old Robert Brooks in handcuffs and a green prison uniform. Brooks is black, and he's surrounded by 14 prison staff, all of whom appear to be white. They're in a medical exam room at Marcy Correctional Facility near Utica. Over those 10 minutes, Brooks is punched and kicked. He appears to have been choked. He was pronounced dead hours later. His death sparked protests outside the prison and in New York City, as captured in this video shared on social media.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want?
New York's prison commissioner Daniel Marticello said in a statement he was deeply repulsed by the footage. He said that kind of violence cannot be normalized. But Jennifer Scaife says the incident seems straight out of a prison playbook. She leads the Correctional Association of New York, a prison watchdog group that visits facilities and interviews more than 1,000 inmates a year.
People talk about being taken to the infirmary to be assaulted. They talk about the complicity of medical staff in the abuse.
One of the people present during Brooks's beating was a prison nurse. Governor Kathy Hochul has ordered all of them to be fired. But it's not that simple. Reporters from the Marshall Project have reviewed the disciplinary records of thousands of New York correction officers over a dozen years. They found that officers often falsified reports to cover up abuse. Even when there was evidence of abuse, the state failed 90% of the time to fire officers. Reporter Alicia Santo says officers get special protection through their union contract.
I mean, we even looked at several deaths where there were payouts of more than $1 million, and no one was disciplined in those cases.
In 2016, an inmate at Clinton Correctional in Dannemora died after being violently assaulted by officers. The family sued and won more than $9 million. One of the officers found guilty of excessive force in that case is still working at the prison to this day. Last summer, Aurora Beach got a call from her brother, who was incarcerated in Dannemora. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, which was unusual.
The first thing out of his mouth when I answered the phone, he said, "Sis, were you going to let me die?" And I said, "What are you talking about?"
Beach's brother then told her he had been assaulted by a group of officers, punched in the face and kicked in the groin.
He said, "I dropped to my knees." He said, "and they all started beating on me, the sergeant and the 3 COs.
NCPR filed a Freedom of Information request for video footage of the incident, but New York's Department of Corrections denied the request, so we can't confirm that those allegations are true. A spokesperson did say in a statement any officers involved in misconduct will be disciplined and, if warranted, referred to outside prosecution. What we did get from our FOIA was a brief summary of the incident at Dannemora, which reveals that one of the officers involved was the same one who was found guilty of excessive force in the 2016 death of an inmate. Jennifer Scaife from the Correctional Association wasn't aware of that incident in Dannemora, but speaking more generally, she says that when prisons keep officers on the payroll who have been found guilty of excessive force, it can exacerbate the culture of unchecked violence.
So these are people who obviously had done something wrong. They get their job back following arbitration. And you can imagine that there is this feeling of impunity that comes from that kind of reinstatement.
Ezekiel Reyes says he saw a lot of abuse in New York State prisons. He served nearly 20 years, most recently at Riverview in Ogdensburg. He was released last year. But one problem with addressing the issue is that Reyes says assaults often go unreported.
Some inmate, they scared to write grievance to the officers because there's going to be consequences behind that. If you write a grievance, you're going to get beat up.
A spokesperson from the Department of Corrections said that kind of retaliation is not allowed and that all allegations of abuse are investigated. Experts say one key way to address abuse behind bars is to increase oversight. In the last decade, about half of all states around the country have created oversight bodies for their prison systems. Alicia Welch is the Associate Director of the Prison and Jail Innovation Lab at the University of Texas at Austin.
Being able to have a window into these facilities, understanding that the quality of life can improve with the help of this type of oversight.
Just last year, Congress passed the Prison Oversight Act with bipartisan support. That act streamlines abuse complaints and requires regular inspections of all federal prisons. Welch says oversight not only benefits inmates, it also sheds light on the issues that face staff.
What we're seeing across the country is a pervasive problem of understaffing. So many agencies are just lacking the number of staff that they need to run a safe facility.
Experts say another key way to increase safety and transparency is by using body cameras. About a third of New York's correction officers wear them, but in the fatal beating of Robert Brooks, none had activated their cameras, so they didn't capture any sound of the incident. That policy has since been updated. Officers must turn on their cameras any time they interact with inmates. And Governor Kathy Hochul ordered the fast track of body cameras in all state prisons. Jennifer Scaife from the state's Correctional Association says it's a good first start, but she thinks the state needs to do more to address deeper-seated problems.
You can't rely on cameras to solve the underlying issues in the culture because you can't rely on people being afraid of getting caught carrying out violence to end violence.
The family of Robert Brooks is suing all the officers involved in his death, as well as New York State's prison commissioner. The lawsuit describes a, quote, dark and dangerous reality for incarcerated people in New York. The lawsuit over his death could take years to settle. Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Saranac Lake and Caretaker of Canton. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.